The mechanic was having one of those days. The kind of day that made him question whether his dream of owning a successful shop was worth all the struggle. His hands were covered in grease from working on an old engine that refused to cooperate. He had spent the morning fixing a car that seemed to break down more than it actually ran. With no customers coming in and bills piling up, he was beginning to wonder how much longer he could keep the garage open. His shop was small, tucked away on the edge of town where hardly anyone passed by. It wasn't much, just a couple of rusty workbenches, old tools that he had collected over the years, and a few battered cars parked outside. But to him it was everything. It was his dream, even if it felt more like a burden these days. The man had always loved cars ever since he was a kid. He would spend hours tinkering with his old bicycle, trying to make it faster, better, anything to make it work. It wasn't just a job to him. It was a passion. But now it felt like that passion was slipping away with every failed attempt to fix an engine, or every empty afternoon with no customers. It was the middle of the afternoon when he decided to take a break. The weather was turning ugly. Dark clouds were rolling in from the west and a storm was coming. He pulled himself away from the engine he was working on and stepped outside to take a breath. As he stood there wiping his hands on an old rag, he spotted something unusual. A young woman was standing at the side of the road, her thumb extended out, clearly asking for a ride. She wasn't from around here, he could tell by the way she was dressed. She wore a light jacket that looked expensive, and her shoes, though scuffed from walking, had the kind of polish that suggested she wasn't used to this kind of life. For a moment, he hesitated. He had never been the type to pick up hitchhikers, especially not with the way things were going lately. Who knew what kind of trouble she might bring? But something about her made him pause. She didn't seem like the kind of person who would be causing trouble. Maybe it was the way she stood, her head slightly lowered as if she were lost. Or maybe it was just the way the world felt at that moment, heavy and uncertain. Either way, he found himself walking toward her without really thinking about it. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice a little rough from working all day. The woman looked up at him, her eyes tired but grateful. "Yes, please. I've been walking for hours." Without saying much more, she climbed into the passenger seat of his old truck. The mechanic didn't ask where she was going, and she didn't offer the information. They sat in silence as he started the engine and drove down the road. For the first few miles, neither of them said anything. The woman stared out the window, her face pale, as if she had something weighing on her mind. The mechanic wasn't one to pry, so he focused on the road, driving with a steady hand. The storm clouds were gathering and the wind was picking up. He could feel the pressure in the air like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the rain to start. "Where are you headed?" he finally asked, glancing over at her. She seemed to snap out of her thoughts and looked at him with a faint, almost apologetic smile. "I'm not really sure," she said quietly. "I'm just trying to get away for a while." The mechanic didn't ask any more questions. He could sense that she wasn't ready to share much, and he wasn't the type to push. The road was long and empty, stretching on in front of them as the rain began to fall in steady sheets, making the world outside look like a blur. It wasn't until the woman spoke again that the silence between them felt less awkward. "I'm running from my family," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The mechanic didn't know what to say to that. Running from family wasn't something he had much experience with. He had always been close to his own despite the struggles. But something in her voice made him want to listen. He didn't ask her for details. He could tell that wasn't something she was ready to give. Instead, he nodded. "I get it," he said simply. "Sometimes you just need to get away." She nodded too, though it seemed like she was still deep in thought, as if her mind was a million miles away. They continued to drive, the rain pouring harder now, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up. He thought about his own life, about the garage that wasn't doing well, about the bills he couldn't pay. But in the company of this stranger, he felt a strange sense of calm. She had a presence about her, something that made the world seem a little quieter, a little more bearable. After a while, he pulled into a small diner, its neon sign glowing faintly in the rain. "We should stop and get something to eat," he said, more to break the silence than anything else. The woman agreed, and they went inside together. The diner was nearly empty, the warm glow of the lights providing a sense of comfort against the storm outside. They sat in a corner booth away from the few other patrons who were busy with their own meals. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a tired smile, brought over a menu. The mechanic ordered a coffee and the woman ordered something light. The two of them sat across from each other, exchanging only a few words about the food. The mechanic didn't push and the woman didn't offer much. It was as though they were both waiting for something, but neither of them knew exactly what that something was. For a while, the mechanic watched her from across the table. She didn't look like someone who had it all figured out. In fact, she looked like someone who was in the middle of figuring out how to survive in a world that was asking more of her than she could give. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he felt sympathy for her, even though he didn't know her story. The rain outside had turned into a downpour, and the mechanic knew that they couldn't stay at the diner forever. But as they finished their meals, he found himself wondering if he could do something more for her. She clearly didn't have much, and the thought of her out there on her own made him feel uneasy. After a quiet moment, he finally spoke. "You're welcome to stay at my place for the night, if you need somewhere to go. It's not much, but it's a roof." The woman seemed surprised by the offer but didn't hesitate for long. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's very kind." And with that, the mechanic found himself with a hitchhiker in his truck, heading toward his small, modest apartment. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this strange encounter was the beginning of something new for both of them. The rain continued to pour as they drove the short distance to the mechanic's apartment. The wipers struggled to keep up with the relentless downpour, and the truck's engine hummed steadily in the background. The woman sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap. She seemed distant, her eyes gazing out the window as if lost in her own thoughts. He glanced over at her as he turned onto the street where his apartment complex was located. Her face was soft, but there was something guarded about her, as if she were carrying a heavy burden. He didn't ask her about it. He had learned over the years that some things were best left unspoken. Pulling into the parking lot, he parked his truck and turned off the engine. The sound of the rain tapping against the metal roof was the only noise for a moment. The woman stayed still for a second, staring out the windshield before she unbuckled her seatbelt and turned toward him. "Thanks again," she said quietly. Her voice was soft but sincere. "I don't know what I would have done without that ride." The mechanic gave her a small smile. "No problem. It's the least I can do." He opened the door and stepped out into the rain, quickly making his way to the building's entrance. She followed behind, walking a little more slowly, as if hesitant to enter a place that wasn't her own. The mechanic didn't think much of it. He knew she was probably used to more luxury than what his small apartment had to offer. The building wasn't much, just a standard 3-story complex that smelled faintly of old carpet and dust. It wasn't a bad place, but it wasn't exactly glamorous. The elevator was broken, so they made their way up the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was quiet. The faint hum of a refrigerator and the soft murmur of a TV from a neighboring apartment the only sounds. When they reached his door, the mechanic fumbled for his keys and unlocked it. Inside, the apartment was small but cozy. There was a couch in the living room, an old TV in the corner, and a small kitchen with mismatched dishes and utensils. The place was lived in, not exactly clean, but comfortable enough for one person. He motioned toward the couch. "You can sit down if you'd like," he said. "I'll grab you a towel. You're probably soaked." She nodded, giving him a small smile. "Thanks." He disappeared into the bathroom to grab a couple of towels, and when he returned, he handed one to her. She took it gratefully, wiping her face and hair. The mechanic watched her for a moment, wondering if she was truly okay. There was something about her, something in the way she held herself, like she didn't quite belong here in this small town with him. But then again, he didn't belong here either, or at least that's how he felt most days. She sat down on the couch, curling her legs up underneath her. Her clothes, though expensive, looked worn, and her eyes had a tired look to them, as if she hadn't been sleeping well. He felt a sudden urge to ask her more about herself, but he stopped himself. They had only just met, and it didn't seem right to press her. "I don't have much to offer," he said, trying to break the silence. "But there's food in the fridge if you're hungry." She looked up at him, her expression softening. "I'm not hungry, thank you. I just need to rest for a bit," he nodded, not pushing it further. He could tell that she needed time to herself, and he wasn't one to crowd anyone. He moved to the kitchen and started making himself a sandwich, the sounds of the rain outside filling the quiet apartment. As he sat down at the small kitchen table, he couldn't help but wonder what her story was. Who was she really? The more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't really know anything about her. Her name, where she was from, or why she was running away. All she had said was that she was trying to get away for a while. But there had been something in her eyes, something that made him think her story was more complicated than she was letting on. After a few minutes, the woman spoke again, breaking the silence. "I'm sorry for all of this. I know I've been kind of vague, but I just didn't know how to explain." The mechanic turned his attention toward her, his sandwich forgotten for the moment. "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to explain if you're not ready." "I get it," she gave him a small smile. "I appreciate that. It's just, I've never really been in a situation like this before. My family, they don't understand me. They don't let me make my own decisions. And I guess I just had to leave." He sat down across from her, his interest piqued. "What do you mean, leave?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "I come from a family with money. A lot of it. I'm expected to follow a certain path, do things the way they want me to. But I don't want that. I want to live my own life, make my own choices, and I just couldn't take it anymore. So I left." The mechanic didn't know how to respond. He had always lived a simple life, and the idea of being surrounded by wealth and expectations was foreign to him. But he could hear the pain in her voice, the frustration that came with feeling trapped. He took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "That sounds tough. I'm sorry you're going through that." She nodded, her eyes distant. "It is. I thought I could just leave and everything would be better. But it's not that simple. It's hard to escape something when it's always chasing you." They both sat in silence for a while, the weight of her words hanging in the air. He could tell that she was fighting something, trying to hold herself together. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. Instead, he stood up and went to the kitchen to grab a bottle of water, handing it to her when he returned. She took it gratefully, and as she drank, the mechanic took a seat next to her on the couch. "You don't have to stay here forever," he said quietly. "But if you need a place to lay low for a while, you're welcome to stay as long as you need." She looked over at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you. I really don't know what I would have done without you." He smiled, feeling a sense of warmth that he hadn't felt in a long time. "You don't have to thank me. It's the least I can do." The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the apartment the air felt a little lighter. She might have been running from her past, but for the moment at least she was safe here with him. And in some strange way he felt like he wasn't as alone as he had been just hours ago. They sat together in silence for a while, the storm outside raging on, but inside there was peace. Neither of them knew what the next day would bring, but for now it was enough to simply be. The days that followed were quiet, a comfortable kind of quiet. The storm outside continued to rage, and the world beyond the window seemed like a distant place. Inside the apartment, life moved at its own pace. The mechanic went about his usual routine, working on cars in the shop, fixing what he could, and doing his best to keep the business afloat. But something had changed. The presence of the woman, someone so different from his usual customers, had added a certain warmth to his otherwise lonely existence. She had stayed for a couple of days, just as she had promised. At first she stayed mostly in her room, the small spare bedroom he'd offered to her, but slowly she started to venture out, moving through the apartment with a quiet grace, as if she were trying to find her place in this unfamiliar world. The mechanic didn't ask her what she was thinking or what had happened in her past. He could tell she wasn't ready to share everything, and he respected that. But he could tell she was trying to adjust to this new, temporary life. The tension that had surrounded her when she first arrived seemed to be easing, replaced with something like peace. It was subtle, but it was there. One afternoon, after a morning of working on a car that was giving him trouble, he came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She wasn't typing. Instead, she was staring at the screen, her expression distant. He knew that look. It was the same one he'd worn countless times when he was trying to figure out how to fix a problem he couldn't quite solve. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting his tool bag down and wiping his hands with a rag. She looked up, blinking as if she hadn't realized he was there. "Oh yeah, just thinking," she said, her voice soft. He could tell she wasn't entirely focused on the conversation. There was something on her mind, something heavy. "Anything you want to talk about?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not right now. I don't know what to do. I keep thinking about everything I left behind, and I don't know if I made the right choice." The mechanic didn't rush to answer. He knew what it was like to feel lost, to wonder if the decisions you made were the right ones. Instead, he just sat down across from her, waiting for her to continue when she was ready. "You ever feel like you don't belong where you are?" she asked suddenly, looking him in the eye. He smiled gently. "All the time," he said honestly. "I've been working here for years, but sometimes it feels like I'm just drifting. You know? Like I'm doing what I'm supposed to, but I'm not really living. I've always wanted more, but I don't know how to get it." Her eyes softened and she gave him a small smile. "I guess we're both in the same boat then." They sat there for a while, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. She told him a little about her past, though she kept most of it vague. She talked about her family, the expectations they had placed on her, the things they wanted her to become. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time, he felt like she was beginning to trust him, even if just a little. In the days that followed, their friendship deepened in ways that surprised both of them. She began to help him out at the garage, even offering advice on some of the cars that came in. It wasn't that she was an expert, but she had a natural curiosity about how things worked, and it made her eager to learn. She would watch him as he worked, asking questions, offering ideas. Sometimes she would even roll up her sleeves and help, handing him tools or offering to clean parts. It wasn't long before the mechanic realized that she wasn't just some rich girl who didn't know anything about hard work. She had a genuine interest in learning, in making things better, even if it wasn't glamorous. She wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, and that impressed him. One evening, after a long day of work, he decided to take a break and grab some dinner. He was about to head to the kitchen when he found her in the living room, sitting on the couch with a book in her hands. She looked up when he entered, and without thinking, he blurted out, "Why don't you come with me? We can grab a bite at the diner down the street." She raised an eyebrow. "The diner?" He shrugged. "Yeah, it's not much, but they make a good burger. I figured you could use a break from all the quiet here." She hesitated for a moment, but then a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "I guess I could go for a burger." They both got into the truck, and as they drove to the diner, the mechanic couldn't help but notice that she seemed more relaxed than she had in days. She wasn't talking much, but the tension that had been in her posture earlier was gone. She looked out the window as they drove, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest, but she didn't seem so lost anymore. At the diner, they found a booth by the window, the soft glow of the neon lights outside casting a comforting hue over the small, cozy space. The waitress, a woman with a kind smile, came over to take their order. The mechanic ordered a burger and fries, and the woman, for the first time in days, ordered something simple, just a salad and a drink. As they sat there, waiting for their food, the conversation began to flow more naturally. She asked him about his work, about the garage, about how he had gotten into the business. He told her about his early days, how he had learned the ropes from his father, who had been a mechanic himself. How he had always loved working with his hands, but how over time, the reality of running a business had worn him down. She listened intently, asking questions here and there, but mostly just letting him talk. For the first time, it felt like someone cared about what he had to say. As they ate, the conversation shifted again. She asked him what his dreams were, what he truly wanted in life. He thought about it for a moment before answering. "I guess I want to have my own shop. Not just a little garage like this, but a real place. Somewhere people can come and trust that they'll get good work. A place where I can build something. I don't know. Something bigger than this." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "That sounds like a good dream." He smiled, though there was a trace of uncertainty in his voice. "It's just a dream right now. But that's how all big things start, right?" she said, looking at him with a sense of understanding. For the first time, the mechanic felt like they were on the same wavelength. Both of them were chasing something that seemed just out of reach, and both of them were uncertain whether they'd ever get there. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were there together, sharing a meal and a quiet understanding. As the evening wore on and they finished their food, the mechanic couldn't shake the feeling that things were beginning to shift in a way that he hadn't expected. The woman, this stranger who had come into his life so suddenly, was starting to feel like more than just someone passing through. In some strange way, she had become a part of his world, and he was starting to see the world through her eyes. They didn't talk about her past anymore. She didn't mention her family, her wealth, or the life she had left behind. For the first time since meeting her, he didn't feel like she was running away from something. She was simply here, and that was enough. They left the diner and drove back to the apartment, the truck humming along the rain-soaked streets. Neither of them said much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came when two people were beginning to understand each other, when the space between them had closed just a little. Back at the apartment, the woman thanked him for the evening, her voice softer than usual. "It was nice," she said, offering him a genuine smile. "I didn't realize how much I needed a night like that," the mechanic smiled back, feeling something warm stir in his chest. "Any time." And as the rain continued to fall outside, they both settled into the quiet comfort of the apartment, each of them finding a little more peace in their own way. The days had begun to blend together. The mechanic and the woman, who had become more than just a passerby in his life, settled into a comfortable rhythm. The garage wasn't as busy as he'd hoped, but somehow it didn't feel so bad anymore. Having someone to share the space with, someone who didn't judge or expect anything from him, made everything seem a little lighter. She was still quiet at times, retreating into her own thoughts, but there was an undeniable change in her. The tension in her shoulders had lessened, her smile came more easily, and there was a small but noticeable brightness in her eyes. He could tell she was starting to relax, to feel at home in a way that was different from her life before. But even with all the progress, the mechanic knew she wasn't fully at ease. She had left her old life behind, but it wasn't as simple as just walking away. He knew there were still pieces of her past that she wasn't ready to share, parts of her story that remained locked away. And though he didn't push her, he couldn't help but wonder what she was running from. One afternoon, after a morning spent fixing an engine that had been giving him grief, he found her sitting at the kitchen table again, her laptop open in front of her. This time, though, she wasn't looking at the screen. Instead, she was staring off into space, her fingers tapping absently on the table. He hesitated before speaking. "Hey, everything okay?" She blinked, as if his voice had pulled her back into the present. She gave him a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just thinking," she said softly. He sat down across from her, setting his coffee mug on the table. "About what?" She hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "I don't know, just everything, the decision to leave, my family, this life I've been running from." The mechanic's heart tightened slightly. He could hear the weight of her words, the conflict in her voice. He didn't want to pry, but he also knew that the silence between them was heavy and it wasn't helping her. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving?" Her eyes flicked to him, and for a moment he thought she might withdraw again, but instead she met his gaze, her face open, vulnerable. "I don't know. I think about it every day. I wonder if I made the right choice, if I should have stayed and fought for the life I was supposed to have, but then I remember how suffocating it was. The constant pressure to be someone I wasn't." The mechanic nodded, understanding all too well. "Sounds like a tough spot to be in. I can't imagine what that must have been like." She smiled softly. "It wasn't all bad. There were good moments too. But in the end, I just couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't. I felt like I was living a life that wasn't mine." The mechanic thought about his own life. He had never been in her position. He didn't have a family with expectations of grandeur or a future mapped out for him. But he knew what it was like to feel trapped. To feel like you were stuck in a place that didn't fit, working towards something that felt out of reach. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I'm not in a position to understand exactly what you went through, but I get what it feels like to be stuck. I've been in this garage for years just trying to make it work, and sometimes I wonder if I'll ever get out of here. But maybe in a way that's just part of the journey. You keep going, even when you're not sure where you're headed." She looked at him, studying his face for a moment before nodding slowly. "Maybe. I guess we all have our struggles, don't we?" He smiled. "Yeah, we do." There was a pause, and for a moment the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Then, as if to break the silence, she suddenly stood up and grabbed her jacket. "I'm going to step out for a bit. I need to clear my head." He watched her for a moment, wondering if he should say something else, but decided against it. Sometimes people needed space, and he wasn't one to push. "All right. Be careful." She nodded and slipped out the door, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He went back to work, fixing another engine that was having trouble, though his mind kept drifting back to her. It wasn't long before the sound of footsteps returned, followed by the door opening. She stepped inside, a little breathless, as if she had been walking fast. There was something different in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. She looked determined. "I think I figured it out," she said, her voice steady. He raised an eyebrow. "Figured what out?" "Where I go from here," she said, her tone calm but full of purpose. "I can't stay here forever." "I know that. But I also can't go back to the life I left. I need to find something for myself. I need to carve out a space where I can be me." The mechanic nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. "That sounds like a big step." "It is," she agreed. "But I think it's the right one. I've spent too long running. It's time to face what's next." The mechanic admired her resolve. He had never been one to shy away from hard work, but there was something incredibly brave about what she was doing. To step away from everything she had known and make a life for herself, it wasn't easy. "I think you'll figure it out," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "You've already come this far. You'll make it." She smiled back, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "I hope so." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The mechanic couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in her, even though they hadn't known each other for long. She had made a difficult decision, one that most people would shy away from, and now she was determined to see it through. Later that evening, as the rain started up again, they sat on the couch, not talking much but simply enjoying each other's company. The woman had started to help him out in the garage more regularly, offering her ideas and skills, and he was surprised by how much she knew. It was clear that she wasn't just a runaway from a rich family. She was someone with depth, someone who had more to offer than her past might suggest. As the days passed, the mechanic noticed that she was beginning to change in other ways too. The weight that had hung over her seemed to be lifting. She was still quiet at times, but there was an air of confidence in her now, something that hadn't been there before. She wasn't running anymore. She was building. But despite everything, there was still the nagging feeling in the back of his mind, the feeling that something was off, that she was hiding something. It wasn't that she was being dishonest, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than she had let on. One evening, when they were working late in the garage, he decided to ask, "Are you ever going to tell me the whole story?" She looked up from the car she was working on, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "Your story. I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want to pressure you, but I can't help but feel like there's more you haven't said." She sighed and set down the wrench in her hand. "It's not that I don't want to tell you. It's just complicated." "I get it," he said quietly. "But whenever you're ready, I'm here to listen." She met his gaze, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then with a soft smile, she nodded. "Maybe someday. Not today, but someday." The mechanic nodded back, accepting her answer for now. He didn't need to know everything. He just needed to be there to give her the space she needed. And so the days passed. They continued to work together, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. But even though they were both moving forward in their own way, there was still the lingering question of what the future held. Neither of them knew, but for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty didn't feel so daunting. The days had become quieter now, or at least it felt that way. The mechanic had grown used to the rhythms of his life with her around, the sound of her typing at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the engine as he worked, and the way she would help him without asking, quietly and naturally, like she had always belonged here. Despite the deep conversations they'd had over the past few weeks, something still lingered between them unspoken. The woman still wasn't ready to fully open up about her past, and he respected that. He had come to understand that some things couldn't be forced out, that some people needed time to heal, to feel safe enough to share their story. But no matter how much he respected her boundaries, He couldn't ignore the fact that the time for her to make a decision about her future had come. She had been running for so long, and even though she was beginning to feel more at home in this small town, there was still a life waiting for her out there, beyond the garage and the small apartment. One evening, as the sun began to set and the warm orange glow filled the apartment, the mechanic found himself sitting on the couch, lost in his thoughts. His hands were still covered in grease from working on a car, but his mind wasn't on the engine anymore. It was on her. He had always known that the time would come when she would have to leave. The pull of her old life would eventually catch up with her, no matter how much she tried to escape it. As if on cue, she stepped into the room, her presence gentle but firm. "I think it's time," she said, her voice steady but with a note of hesitation. "I can't stay here forever. I've been hiding long enough." The mechanic looked up at her, his heart sinking a little. He had known this moment would come, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel all too real. "I understand," he said softly, setting the rag down beside him. "You've got to do what's best for you." She stood there for a moment as if weighing her words before walking over and sitting next to him on the couch. For the first time in a long while, she didn't seem so sure of herself. There was a vulnerability in her that he hadn't seen before, and it made his heart ache. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go or what I'm supposed to do." He nodded, understanding the struggle. "You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take the next step. That's what matters." She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said quietly. "You've made me feel like there's still hope, like I can start over." He smiled, though the feeling in his chest was bittersweet. "That's what I'm here for. You've got a lot of strength in you. You just have to believe it." For a moment they sat in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The mechanic could feel the weight of her decision settling in, and as much as he wanted her to stay, he knew she couldn't live her life here, in this small town, forever. There was so much more waiting for her if she was brave enough to face it. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Maybe I'll go back. Not to my family, but somewhere else. Somewhere I can start fresh. Maybe a new city, a new life, something where I can really be myself." He turned to her, his heart swelling with pride. "That sounds like a good plan. But you've got to make sure it's your decision, not anyone else's." She smiled, her face lighting up in a way that he hadn't seen in weeks. "I think it is. For the first time, I feel like it really is my choice, and I think I'm ready to make it." As they talked into the night, the mechanic felt a sense of peace he hadn't expected. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing her future. And for all the uncertainty in her voice, he could see the strength in her eyes. She had come so far from the person who had arrived at his doorstep, desperate and lost. Now she was standing on the edge of something new, something full of possibilities. The next morning she was gone. It happened quickly, almost without warning. The mechanic had been in the garage finishing up the work on a car when he came inside to find that she had packed her things. There was a note left on the kitchen table, her handwriting elegant and neat. "Thank you for everything. You gave me more than just a place to stay. You gave me a reason to believe in myself again. I'll never forget that. Take care of yourself and keep chasing your dreams." It was short, but it was enough. He folded the note and tucked it into his pocket, his chest tight with emotion. She had made her choice, and though he would miss her, he knew it was the right one for her. She was ready to leave the past behind and carve out a new future. As the days passed, life in the garage returned to its usual rhythm. The mechanic kept busy, working on cars and keeping the shop open, but something was different. The quiet that had once felt lonely now felt comforting, like the calm after a storm. He found himself thinking about her often, wondering where she was, what she was doing, and if she had found the new life she had been searching for. Then, one afternoon, a few weeks later, he received a call. It was from her. "Hey," she said, her voice sounding different, more confident. "I made it." The mechanic's heart skipped a beat. "You did? That's great. How's everything?" She laughed, and he could hear the joy in her voice. "It's not perfect, but it's mine. I found a little place in a new city, got a job at a local shop. It's a fresh start, and I'm excited. I feel like I'm finally in control of my own life." He smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I'm proud of you." "Thanks," she said, her voice softening. "I couldn't have done it without you." The conversation lasted for a while longer, and as they hung up, the mechanic felt a sense of peace settle over him. She was where she needed to be, doing what she needed to do, and for the first time he felt like he had made a difference in someone's life. Life went on, as it always did. The mechanic continued working at the shop, fixing cars and dreaming of the future. He hadn't seen her since that day she left, but he thought of her often. And he knew deep down that she was doing just fine, that she was exactly where she needed to be. One day, a few months later, he received a package in the mail. It was small, unmarked, but the return address was familiar. Her name, her new city. Inside the package was a simple keychain, a small token, but the note attached to it was what caught his attention. I'll always remember how you helped me find my way. I hope you find yours too. The mechanic smiled, his heart full. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And with that, he knew that in some small way, both of their journeys had come full circle. He was still working toward his dream, still chasing the future that sometimes seemed just out of reach. But now, more than ever, he believed that someday he would get there. The weeks that followed were marked by a new sense of quiet that had settled into the mechanic's life. The days felt longer without the soft presence of the woman who had once brought a new rhythm to his small, solitary world. Her absence was both a weight and a relief. He was proud of her for taking the leap, for leaving the small town and building something for herself. But there was an emptiness that lingered, a space that only she had filled. He kept himself busy, as he always did, fixing cars and maintaining the shop. But there was a part of him, a quiet part that didn't always speak, that couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing from his life. His dreams, his vision of owning a bigger shop, expanding the business, felt further away than ever. The work was steady, but it was never quite enough. There were days when he would drive home, his hands sore from the labor, and think about all the things he wanted to do, all the changes he wanted to make. But the road ahead seemed too long, too uncertain. The memory of her was never far from his mind. The late-night talks, the moments they'd shared working together in the shop, the way she had gradually opened up, revealing bits of herself. He couldn't forget her, and as much as he tried to tell himself it was just a passing connection, he knew deep down that it was more. She had come into his life at a time when he had needed someone to remind him that change was possible, that dreams could still come true no matter how old you were, no matter how stuck you felt. One afternoon, as the mechanic was closing up the shop for the day, a familiar sound broke through the silence. The hum of an engine, a car pulling into the lot. He didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just another customer looking for repairs. But when he looked up, his heart skipped a beat. There she was. Her face was still familiar, but there was a difference now. Her confidence was palpable, a quiet strength that radiated from her. She was dressed differently, more polished than the woman who had first shown up at his door, but her eyes still held that same softness, that same vulnerability. She stepped out of the car, her gaze finding his across the lot. A small smile played on her lips, but there was something more in her expression now. An understanding, a recognition of the journey they had both been on, the distance they had traveled. "Hey," she said, her voice warm but steady. "I figured it was time to check in." The mechanic was speechless for a moment, taken aback by her sudden appearance. He had thought of her often, but seeing her here, standing in front of him again, made something inside him stir. Hope, maybe, or something deeper that he couldn't quite name. "Wow," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been a while." She nodded, taking a step closer. "I know, but I've been thinking about you. I wanted to see how you're doing." He swallowed, his heart still racing. "I'm good, busy, you know how it is. Things haven't changed much around here." She smiled softly, then glanced around the shop. "Looks like you've been keeping at it." He chuckled, though it was tinged with something bittersweet. "Yeah, same old, same old." There was an awkward pause, neither of them quite sure what to say next. Finally, she broke the silence. "I guess I owe you an apology," she said, her tone more serious now. "I didn't say goodbye properly. I just left, and I'm sorry for that. You've been so good to me, and I never got the chance to thank you properly." The mechanic shook his head, smiling softly. "You don't need to apologize. You did what you had to do. I get it." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "But I don't think I ever really told you how much you helped me. You gave me a place to breathe when I was suffocating. You made me believe in myself again, and I don't think I ever really thanked you for that." His chest tightened at her words, and he felt a lump form in his throat. "You don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work. You made the choice to change your life. I just helped you see it." She nodded, a soft, almost sad smile on her face. "Still, I wouldn't be where I am today without you. I needed you more than I realized." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The mechanic wasn't sure how to respond. He had never been good with emotions, never been the type to wear his heart on his sleeve. But in that moment, he felt something stirring inside him, something that he couldn't ignore. "I'm glad you're doing well," he said finally, his voice quiet but sincere. "You deserve it." She smiled at him, a true smile this time, one that reached her eyes. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. The mechanic felt a mix of emotions, pride for her, sadness for himself, and something else, something that felt like longing but also acceptance. He knew this was a moment he would remember for a long time, a moment where the past, present, and future all collided in a way that felt bittersweet but beautiful. "Well," she said, breaking the silence, "I should probably get going. I don't want to keep you from your work." The mechanic nodded, not sure what to say next. But before she turned to leave, she hesitated. "Actually," she said, "there's something I wanted to ask you." "What is it?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. She looked at him, her expression more serious now. "I was wondering if you'd ever consider coming to visit. I know it's a big ask, but I'd love for you to see the place I'm staying. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I feel like it would be good for both of us to see how far we've come." The mechanic's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected that, but the idea of seeing her life now in the place she had built for herself felt like something important, something he couldn't pass up. He thought about it for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'd like that," he said, his voice steady. "I think it's time." And so, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, they stood there, silently acknowledging the connection between them that had never fully disappeared. There was still a lot they didn't know, still so many things left unsaid, but in that moment, they both knew one thing for certain. They had each made a mark on the other's life, and that was something that would never fade. As the mechanic watched her drive away, he felt something shift inside him, something hopeful. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew that he had done the right thing. He had helped someone find their way, and now it was time for him to do the same. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was ready for whatever came next.